tell the politician, back off. You have no knowledge of the law. You have no knowledge of law enforcement. You cannot force my officers to do the wrong thing.
But that is somebody's son. That is somebody's child. That is part of a family. And I think that is the part that they are missing out.
Because E and F are apt to be used oppressively.
It's like because we don't see disabled people as sexual beings, which is ridiculous.
You mean they don't want to listen to your version of science? They have science. You have your science.
We need to do is teach people to think and not what to think.
Today, it's too bad that everybody do what they want.
If I could forgive Bernard Ford, then I could forgive Bob Morris too. And today, on this day, I no more have anything in my heart for what he did.
The education system has to be very fluid and dynamic because we're living in very different and changing times.
Treating all your citizens equally, all your citizens fairly, recognizing each group, not discriminating against one or the other.
And viewers and listeners, welcome back to the first segment of the Bubb Report. Now, the death of Pope Francis has reverberated around the world, including in the Caribbean church, with the Catholic leader remembered by millions as a Jesuit pontiff who pushed for social and economic justice. Now, the 88-year-old People's Pope shied away from pomp and ceremony and instead became known for his humility and compassion for the most vulnerable in society, including the poor, the marginalized, and the immigrant. Now, Pope Francis was also widely seen as one of the most consequential popes of recent times. Now, and he was also considered an unpredictable leader who took office at a time of crisis and unafraid of upsetting traditionalists within his church, but also far from the simplistic progressive figure sometimes portrayed in secular sectors. And as preparations begin for the conclave that will elect his successor, it remains to be seen whether his outlook on the church's role in the world solidifies into an enduring legacy. Now, in his decade-plus tenure in the Vatican, Pope Francis, who died on Monday, that's last Monday, advanced several progressive causes within the Catholic Church, from immigrant and LGBTQ+ rights to climate change and technology ethics, as well as the plight of the suffering of the citizens of Palestine in Gaza and in the West Bank, respectively. His advocacy often clashed with the church's more conservative wing, particularly after the pontiff criticized conservative theologians within the ranks of the institution. Now, of course, Francis aimed to give women also more leadership roles in the church governance. In January, he named the first woman to head a major Vatican office. And of course, how the Caribbean church is remembering Pope Francis is the topic of conversation today. Of course, by the time that this interview is aired, Pope Francis would have already been buried. But we're happy now to be joined by the Bishop of St. George's in Grenada, Bishop Clyde Martin Harvey, who is here to reflect with us on the life and the legacy of the late pontiff. Bishop Harvey, welcome to the Bubb Report.
Thank you, and good day to you and to all your viewers, listeners. I must say, Kellan, that introduction was excellent. Whoever did the research for you certainly got points.
Myself and my producer, we really decided to bring some context and because that's what we try to do here. So thank you for that, Bishop. Bishop, we want to begin by talking about the Caribbean Church. Of course, on background, when we were having a conversation, I did indicate that, Pope Francis is considered the first Pope from the Global South, or, he's from our region, he's from the Western Hemisphere. So talk to us about how the Caribbean Church is remembering Pope Francis as someone who really is from the Latin American and Caribbean region.
That's not as easy a question as it sounds, because most Caribbean Catholics, I don't think, have that breadth of vision to see themselves as part of CELAM. CELAM is the Conference of bishops of Latin America and the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
Usually when people say Selam, they think only of Latin America, but we are an integral part of that. And
right.
Every year, the leaders of the church in the Caribbean meet with the leaders of the church in Latin America. And it's now becoming something that is really effective. Very often we had the problem of language, that most of us didn't know Spanish, and many of the Latin Americans didn't know English either. But that is being corrected slowly but surely, and we have a few Caribbean bishops who are fluent in Spanish. So that makes it a lot easier. But remembering Francis, a lot of it has to do, one, with the personal meetings that we bishops have had with him. I've had 2 interpersonal meetings, both of them within small groups, relatively small groups, 20 people. So you had a chance to interact with him, ask questions, and so on. So that's one way of it. And then the other thing, of course, is the media blitz, of which he's so much a part.
Yes.
You get to know him through the media. Although one of the things that I have seen and laughed at, I don't think it's a Caribbean reality. It's something that's almost universal. It's a number of times that people don't get their messages across, put it on Facebook, and labeled it as Francis. And it wasn't Francis at all. I mean, there was one claiming that he said something on Sunday when we knew that he wasn't able to.
That's not what he said. He was not able to speak as much.
He wasn't able to speak. And it wasn't that he gave somebody a text to deliver. It was totally different from the text which was given to deliver. So I knew it was one of those not memes, they call it something else. But, So you have to be aware of that. But what we do know, and this is very much my view, that you use the word consequential, and when you use that word, I add to it, but you will not know what the real consequences are for some time. Some people use that word as if, they talked about Joe Biden as a consequential president of the United States, but Joe Biden is practically faded off the scene. You won't see whether anything will really come of him. But I don't think Francis is that type. I think Francis has set the things in motion. And as the head of the Catholic Church, he has a power that Joe Biden never had. And that is, he could really shape things in a certain way and trust that those who share his view will stay with it. But that remains to be seen as well. So he is certainly consequential in the sense that we are already seeing the consequences of some of what he has done. One thing which I didn't realize how important it would be until now. I never realized until he died that by the time he came to die, he would have chosen 80% of the men who are there to elect his successor. Now that is real good going if you're talking about ensuring a future.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And you mentioned, let us talk about, in your view, some of his, whether it's his encyclicals or whether it's administrative changes, in the context of the functioning of the church. What are some of those, I don't want to use the word policies because I don't think that applies to the church, right?
Well, come on. You're only trying to fool me, Kevin. You know darn well that politics. I want to rule at all. There is politics in this thing, and we have to admit that.
Of course. But let us talk about some of those consequential things that Pope Francis.
For me,
yes,
it's a question of style.
Mm-hmm.
He brought a refreshing style to his own personal encounters, as well as to how he governed the church. And the images that stand out, of course, I mean, nobody knew of a pope asking people to pray for them and then bowing down for the prayer. I mean, for most people, the pope is there for you to ask him to pray for you. But his radical spiritual humility came through from his very first appearance. And that was important. When I met him in 2018, you go in with a group of bishops and he greets you one by one, and then he shows you to a set of seats. And usually it was a question of you meet him one-on-one for 5 minutes and then you go your way. He came into the room and sat down in the midst of us. Okay, gentlemen, what can we talk about? And it was a real engagement. And when he had a point that he could pick up and talk about it, he would do that. He was not afraid of answering questions. One of the moments that was extremely humorous for all of us was when Archbishop Harris asked him, how do you deal with all the criticism that you're getting? Because already this was about 5 years after he was elected. He said, I don't take it on. He says, I have my people who tell me what is of consequence or not, what I should take on, and I listen to that, and if I need more information, I ask for it. But it was clear that he was a man very much at peace with himself, even though he was hearing a lot of criticism and so on. I'm hearing you now.
Yes, Bishop. Let us talk. One of the first things that Pope Francis did, in fact, when he was elected Pope, was that he visited the Lampedusa island. That is an island off the Italian coast, where many migrants from war-torn countries in the Middle East and Africa were fleeing to and waiting perhaps for some kind of immigration hearing in Italy or some other country in the European Union. And that seemed to set the tone for his very public pronouncements on issues of immigrants and the most vulnerable among us. And refugees and so on. I remember in the first Trump administration, he said we should be building bridges, not walls, and things like that. So let us talk about that aspect of his legacy. And of course, not only that, but he would also go to prisons, Holy Thursday, washing the feet of some of the inmates and things like that. Let us talk about that aspect and within a theological context. What does that say about what kind of theology he was adhering to when he engaged in that type of public engagement?
But his fundamental philosophy is that every human being is worthy of our love. It needs our love and should be loved for their own worth and not because you had put some label on them. So that he really reached out in every situation to show God's love to the least of the brethren. My favorite picture of him is a man who was suffering from neurofibromastosis. That's this disease that has, your face all messed up. And I had one or two friends who had similar problems. But in watching him there with this man, holding this man to his chest, and really almost kissing him. It was a powerful, powerful symbol of that radical valuing of every human being. Now, many of us say that we radically value every human being until we come up against something that costs us. But that was not Francis. Francis, every opportunity he got, and that is why he could move out towards refugees, migrants, and so on. So on the one hand, it was that fundamental valuing of every human being. And alongside that was the memory that a lot of what we were invited to enter into, that we ourselves, right, have that in our background, in our heritage. Like his parents were migrants, his grandparents were
migrants from Italy.
Yeah, they were migrants from Italy. And when he went to the prison before he died, Regina Mundi prison, he told them, he says, there but for the grace of God, I would be with you. I would be among you. If he wasn't born and if he hadn't become a priest, he was saying, I might have been with you. As a matter of fact, one person said jokingly that he knows quite a few priests in prison now, so even if he had become a priest, he might have well been in prison as well. But that sense of identification with people is very, very important if you really want to serve. And that is where some people, like some of those who now lead world governments, they don't understand that. The other is the enemy. The other is the one to look down on. For Francis, the other is the one to be embraced in Christian love.
Let us talk about this, and I'm glad you brought up this notion of other, Bishop, because I'm bringing this up because Pope Francis came in for heavy criticism for embracing some aspects of the other. And the other that I'm referencing here are members of the LGBTQ plus community. Of course, Pope Francis, he maintained the church's position that certain things are sin in the way that the church sees it, but at the same time, he said, "I'm going to welcome everyone." He used this field hospital analogy. But Pope Francis came in for a lot of heavy criticism for wanting to bless gay couples. Of course, not administering the sacrament of marriage, because that's not something that the church would do, but, offer blessing and acknowledgement that, these people are part of the flock. But he came in for heavy criticism. Do you think, Bishop, that sort of divided the church? And where, for example, do you stand on this? Is that something that that caused angst in the Caribbean church when that was done by the Pope?
It caused some angst, right? Some, not all. We are not as agitated about that as the African church was, for example. But I think Francis, he's a master of these maneuvering through these difficult situations. He has a clear stand, and as I said just now, his fundamental stand is that every human being is loved by God. Now, no matter what you talk about somebody's sin, and that's a thing which we have serious problems with as Catholic Church, because we have an understanding of sin which is not about what you see literally. Sin is something that you are responsible for. You are the one who commits the act, and you can do some things and yet not be guilty of sin, even if that thing is objectively a sin. You could take a gun and kill somebody, but the circumstances may very well shift whether you are guilty of sin or not. So when you come to judging people, especially people in their situations, what Francis is saying as the bottom line is that everybody, including LGBTQ people, are in fact children of God and worthy of God's blessing, in the sense that God wants their good. Right? So I, as a priest supposedly representing the love of God for them, I must also be open to blessing them even as God blesses them. I could say there are some situations they may be in, and this he was very, very clear on. Right? We have a concept of marriage, which we uphold, but which you realize that some people want to use it in a way which might be quite confusing. So I hold very firmly to the view that one of the major problems there is when we want to use marriage for everything. You want to call everything marriage. Why can't we say that marriage is a word that you use between a man and a woman? And when it comes between a man or a woman and a woman, you could find some other word, But that caused a lot of confusion because everybody was equating everything with everything. So what Francis has done is he has brought the gay community on par with the rest of the human community, because he's saying the gay community is not only composed of people whom you may label as sinners.
But will that last though? Because another pope may come and decide, you know what, this what Pope Francis did, I don't necessarily agree with that. And again, you mentioned, and this might go to one of the questions of the politics with the next conclave. You have those conservative, more traditionalist forces in the church versus like the African church, for example, very conservative in that way, versus, shall we say, the North American or the Asian church, where you have one of the contenders from the Philippines, the cardinal from the Philippines, who might have a different view. So where does the church go with this? Is it that now Francis is off the scene, that what he declared will not be, acknowledged?
Well, Francis is a gift for the church because Francis has forced the church to acknowledge that there are differences of opinion within it. This sense of seeking to be absolute about what God wants, that we have to be willing to be open that is not as absolute as we'd like to think it is. Right? So he may well, the next pope may well come along and say, well, I can't say yes to gay marriage, Well, two things will happen then is that people will tell him, well, listen, in truth and in fact, your predecessor never said yes to gay marriage.
No, he never said yes. He only said to bless gay people who are in the flock, whether we like to.
If he comes and says, as some African bishops are saying, that you should not bless gay people at all, right? Because in their cultural reality, gay people are cursed. If that is what some African bishops want to say, and if we get an African pope and he comes and he says that, then I think some of us will have to say to him, that is applicable for your culture, which is what Francis is leaving room to do. But you can't condemn everybody simply because in your cultural reality, that's not true. What, of course, will have to be said as well is that anybody who says there are no gay people in Africa is lying.
Or in the church.
Beg pardon?
Or in the church.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, yeah.
Or in the pews, we're members of the church, yes. So, yes, Bishop, let us now go on to talk about, of course, the Catholic Church is clear about who can become priests, deacons, and the role that women play. However, we did see Pope Francis give women more leadership roles. I can't remember what the specific role was that he elevated a woman to. Maybe you can help me with that.
It's called a head of a dicastery. The dicasteries, the church is governed by the Pope, and then under the Pope, you have a number of what they call dicasteries. Previous to Francis, they used to be called congregations. So you have a number of dicasteries, and one dicastery deals with the laity. And I think that is one that he has said a woman should fill that post.
Right. Let us talk about that. Let us talk about and how was that met by the conservative forces? Is that something that the church embraces? That you believe a woman who again we have the sisters, we have women who play significant roles in different already in leadership positions in the church already as we speak, right? What do you think that would mean for the future of the church, elevating a woman to that specific role? Would we be seeing women deacons in the future, for example?
We don't know, and I think any absolute statement on that regard is bound to falter in some way. Right?
Yes.
There is room. A lot of the theologians are saying that there is room in the history of theology for women deacons. History doesn't have women priests. What will happen there down the road? I hesitate. I don't want to be getting into that debate as to what I say must happen. I think that's foolish. But what we have to be clear about is that these are things which, generally speaking, the church is trying to work through in the course of time. If we understand the history of the church, we realize over the past 2,000 years, a lot of things have happened in the church. Right? There were all kinds of people who were saying could not be priests. If somebody was blind, he could not be ordained. Now we have blind men serving as priests. Right? So we have to. Francis had a beautiful expression he used to use. He talked about rigiditas. It's a Latin and Italian expression. And he talks about it as a sickness of the soul. When, in order to affirm yourself, you have to be rigid for yourself and rigid against others. And he says that can never be of the Spirit. So he's already inviting people, especially young seminarians and young priests, to watch how rigid you are becoming, because so often that very rigidity points out something in you that you need to try and ask God to heal.
But somebody said that a critique of rigidity, I mean, I'm no theologian, might also be a question of moral relativism, as the previous pope said. I think it was Benedict who said that.
Well, Benedict, yes, but one of the things that Francis has been very clear about is that he's not being relativistic on most things. What he's saying is there are some things which are in fact relative, and we have to deal with that as it comes, But what we must be careful about is there are some things that we must stand up for. For instance, the sanctity of marriage, right? Now, what does that involve? Now, I've been involved in some discussions recently which are quite interesting in the sense that what we've been saying in those discussions is that we have to be able to talk about marriage in a way that is not simply putting this difficult test before people. We have to be realistic in our preparation of people for marriage. That the Catholic teaching on marriage must come across like the teaching on priesthood, as something for which you must prepare people properly and at some length. Now, what the consequences of that are is another question altogether. In dealing with some of my gay friends, I tell them, if you are talking to me about loving somebody of the same gender, let's be clear, that ain't easy. You know, and I've had people come to me to ask me to pray with them because they're entering into a relationship with somebody and so on. And I pray with them, yes, but I always tell them this is just as difficult as if it was a man marrying a woman. And especially where they have turned towards the same sex because they had a bad experience with the other sex. That's a recipe for doom and disaster. So we have to understand that when we talk relativism, we're not just talking about whether something is okay under circumstances and so on. We have also to be talking about what is the human being objectively capable of. And I think in these days, we have to talk especially, how do we prepare them for the task? We cannot just say, you must get married. We have to help them to prepare for that. And if they have been married before and failed, one of the most difficult things to get people to do, especially men, is to confront the fact that your first marriage failed, but you have to ask yourself, how am I responsible for that failure?
That is interesting. I'm not getting married because it's a box-checking exercise. I think when you get to a certain age, then you have to get married, right? That's another thing, right? Now, one of the perennial vexing questions that continues to plague the church, and not only the reign of Pope Francis as Pope, or his service as Pope, but that has been a perennial issue across several papal leaderships. And that has to do with the child sexual abuse concern. I mean, you know, you hear it diocese after diocese, archdiocese after archdiocese, and on all kinds of, I don't know for the Caribbean, where the Caribbean stands on that issue, but you know, the Pope, of course, historically made a trip to Canada, where I believe he was the first Pope, really, and I'm subject to correction, that apologized for the Church's role in, you know, the systemic physical and sexual abuse of Indigenous children in Canada. I believe he did the same thing in the context of Ireland as well. He said, quote, in Canada, I humbly beg forgiveness for the evil committed by so many Christians against the indigenous peoples. Yeah. Now, let us talk about his role in shoring up this issue and having clerics be held accountable, not only in the context of the internal confines of the church, but also by civil law in the different jurisdictions where the churches are located. Let's talk about that, the whole child sex abuse issue.
The position of the church now is, I think, very clear, right? There is to be no more cover-up. In admitting and confessing guilt, what he said quite clearly was that, okay, we admit that we are guilty of certain things. Therefore, in admitting it, we can't cover it up. And when he found out that some bishops were covering it up, then we have changed the rules so that bishops are also included in the accountability question. So I think that the church now is very clear. What is difficult to deal with is how do you then try to deal with those who are in fact guilty? Do you just simply throw them out? That was once something that's being spoken about very loudly and clearly. But what some of us think, and I add myself to that, is that, okay, a man is guilty, he has a problem, because almost always a man who abuses children has problems. And some women abuse children as well. So what do you do about that? Now, in some instances, you can tell them, listen, you don't belong in the priesthood, please leave. You laicize them. But there are some people who, if you just throw them out there and they have nobody to keep an eye on them, they will run amok. So that some people, especially if you look at monasteries and so on, are saying it is better for us to keep this individual under the supervision of the monastery rather than to just expel him, and that way nobody is supervising. Now, I've known situations where you've done that, the person commits suicide. You do that, and the person then assaults other people. So there are some prudential judgments to be made about what happens in such cases. But the bottom line always is that there must be no opportunity allowed in the future for them to commit such acts again. On that, I think we are very clear.
But Bishop, why wouldn't the church not, if somebody, as you said, your theory of the case is putting people under the supervision of the church, why not transfer that responsibility to law enforcement authorities where those people are, instead of having those people in the church? And are these priests still going to be allowed to be saying mass and things like that, Bishop?
No, I forgot to mention that. You're very right.
Yes.
Right? Where the law has been broken and where investigations are made and so on, the church says the person must stand the consequences of the law.
Okay, very well.
Now, there are some situations in which the evidence for that is not clear. So I know of one or two cases where it was said, we can't really just hand the person over to the law, because even the evidence that we have is not sufficient to convict of anything. But where one of the first steps is, as long as the law is involved, the church must let the law run its course. That's a bottom line, particularly for us in the Caribbean. The law must run its course. You don't beg the lawyers or the magistrate, well, you know, he's a priest or she's a nun, so we will deal with it. No. The days for that, we've learned our lessons with that.
What about the Caribbean church in the context of this culture of child sexual abuse? Is it as widespread in the Caribbean church as we're seeing in other places?
I don't think it's as widespread in the Caribbean church now. We don't know. No, I don't think it's not as widespread. I'm not sure what actually happened long ago, because long ago people had a respect for priests that they really did.
Priests could do no wrong long ago.
Right, priests could do no wrong, you know. And we had to learn the hard way, where there were some priests who had a reputation for holiness, for being able to help people in different ways. And then you discover that was a cloak for child sexual abuse. So that has to be unequivocally condemned. We don't have anybody serving a sentence here in Trinidad at the moment. Or, sorry, not in the Caribbean.
Grenada. In the Caribbean.
Grenada too, in the Caribbean. But we have had some priests, Irish priests, who went back to Ireland, and then they were arrested in Ireland, and they either have served or are serving.
So there have been some Irish priests who served in the Caribbean who are now accountable. Right. Okay.
Yes.
Now, Bishop, one of the things, yes, you know, the church, Pope Francis, and I say refreshingly so, you know, brought this issue of child sexual abuse to the forefront, apologized for it, and you know, he actually met with many victims in many dioceses and archdioceses. I'm yet to hear an apology from the church on its role in colonialism and slavery. Bishop, maybe the next pope, you could propose to the next pope.
Yes. Well, you haven't heard anything from the Catholic Church in the way in which you want it. We have been talking about it at bishops' level, and that is the Caribbean Bishops' Conference. I don't know if we will reach a point of an official and formal apology, but I know certainly there are men among the bishops now who are very clear that some harm was done, maybe a lot of harm was done. And wherever we are able to deal with that, we must apologize. There's a difference between the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church, in the sense that the Anglican Church very clearly had accumulated a certain amount of wealth and so on as a result of that. It's not that clear what is the Catholic Church's challenge in that regard, because the Catholic Church has done a lot of social work with whatever money it got in various circumstances. So it's more difficult to gauge what may be owed. But certainly, I think the Catholic Church remains committed to the socio-economic development of our people. And we have in our islands, for instance, here in Grenada, you have Nulo. In Trinidad, you have Serval. And these are all ways in which the church as a whole is serving the needs of people. And we hope in some way paying whatever debt may be owed in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Well, Bishop, yes, you say that, but of course the papal bull, and you mentioned the Anglican Church, and that's the only reason why I'm bringing up the papal bull now. Mm-hmm. That was issued by Pope Alexander back in 1493. Mm-hmm. That, it played a central role in Christopher Columbus's quote-unquote discovery. Mm-hmm. It was a doctrine of discovery that says, whatever land you discover, it would be for God and country and church and country and things like that. So, and that's the reason why I was bringing up the whole question of apology, not only for slavery, but for what was done to the indigenous people. The massacre in the millions of indigenous people in the name of the church.
Tough one to answer. because a lot of it, of course, happened, and I'm not going to deny that. But the question now is, what do we do about that? What can we do? I am not clear as yet as to how the reparation thing should go about. Because one thing I would hate is for reparation to be done in such a way that only a few bright people benefit from it. Because when I hear people talking about reparation should be used for education, and a lot of that talk is at the level of university, I say, no, that can't be so. So we have to find a way, and I hope the church can get involved in those discussions, to find a way where that can be done. But you know what I would love to see? I would love to see Caribbean people, especially Caribbean people of African descent, right, pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. We may want this from you because you did this to us long ago, but we can still survive. We can still do much better on our own. And if we can get that sense among our people, because too many of our people are still seeing our progress as dependent on gifts from overseas. The whole Trump thing that has us in a mess now is because we think that the gifts from overseas got to stop. Can we find it will take a lot of creative energy and out of the box thinking to begin to do that difficult work of forging a Caribbean society based on our reality, Because one of my pains now is as I see the so-called developed world, right, doing their own thing, and as I hear that the global south, which you mentioned earlier on, right, should be coming together. Mm-hmm. I am not too sure that people understand what that will mean, because we've had relationships with the global south in the past, and somehow it peters out.
Yeah, we had things like the non-aligned movement, which was supposed to be a counterbalance to, the quote-unquote developed world, So,
we have some real, the one thing I would say to you, because I listen to you from time to time, we need voices which are willing to keep us on track, because we go off track so easily, We have Caribbean leaders who sound good, but then beyond the sounding, what is actually happening, right? We're talking about across the global south between Africa and the Caribbean. One of my big anxieties these days is that when I look at India and China, but India mainly, what do I see? I see a civilization in the space age already. I see billionaires within the Indian reality. And I say to myself, you know, Indian children in the Caribbean are able to look to India, to Mother India, to find, you know, this is a country, this is a civilization that is on par with anything that the West has produced or is getting there fast. When I think of our African children, what do we point to when we want to talk about them holding a heritage of which they can be proud? And not just historically, but now. You know, I'm happy to have history taught in our schools and so on. But now, what is happening? What is happening now that we can point to? South Africa was our hope, but more and more we realize South Africa is in serious trouble. Partly because, you know, people won't let them raise their heads. So there are some real challenges. And gosh, all I can say, brother man, is I really hope that we can find in your generation and the one after yours, men and women who will say, we are not going to continue begging anybody for who we are to become or what we are. We will raise our heads high. It will take a lot of work, it will take a lot of self-sacrifice. But the Chinese are a powerful example of that. It didn't come easily, but it came around unity. You know, Zhou Enlai, after Mao, it wasn't Mao who was the main architect of that. It was Zhou Enlai and what's his name? The short stuff.
Jiang Zemin, yes. Jiang Zemin, I think. Was it Jiang Zemin?
No,
one of them,
before him. Before him.
Okay.
After Zhou Enlai, the one who had been exiled by Mao for a while.
Yes. I can't remember. The name is escaping me now.
That kind of holding things together, hard work, and not believing the West when they tell you all kind of thing about yourself.
Yes. This is so true. This is so true. Bishop, as we wrap up this conversation, of course, we know that I believe you've reached the age where you should be enjoying your retirement. Bishop, is that what it is?
I don't know if I will enjoy my retirement because while I would love to rest, but not in peace.
Not yet. You're still a young man, Bishop. You're still a young man.
No. At 76. Well, let me put it this way. I may be young, yes, because I know.
Are you eligible to become Pope at this age? I think no, you could be 70, right? So
to become what?
To become Pope.
No. You can become Pope at any age as long as they elect you. But I'm not foolish myself.
Okay.
What was the original question there?
Yeah, your retirement.
Yeah.
You know, is that something you've pondered or what?
Yes, I've written the letter which you're required to write when you reach age 75. I was hoping that it would have been acted on by now, but the situation in Grenada is difficult. Choosing a successor is not easy, and you don't want to appoint a man who just finds himself facing hell and pressure. So Rome is trying to work it out, and I hope they work it out soon. I used to have a preference, but now I leave it in the hands of the Lord. As they say, wap map.
Isn't the protocol that after retirement you have to remain in the diocese where you served, or do you have a freedom to, shall we say, return?
You can go wherever you want to go.
Okay.
The protocol is that the diocese in which you served is responsible for your welfare. Right. They're supposed to supply you with a good means of living the rest of your life and bury you when you die, unless you go to another diocese to serve.
Good education. Bishop, any final comments from you?
Well, I'll go back to what I was talking about recently, just now.
Yes.
And that is, we desperately need voices for the Caribbean that will help us to speak truth to one another. Voices in the Caribbean. One of the things that I wish for, and it's not something you should be wishing for, you should be doing something about it, and that's part of my conflict at the moment. But we really need people who are as independent trustworthy voices are able to do two things. One, to hold a vision before Caribbean people of what is yet possible for us. And then to be able to do the analysis of what is, so that we can truthfully say to people, you see that? There's a load of rubbish. Don't go down that road. You see this? This is a road that we might follow. But it's difficult because I don't know any group in the Caribbean that exists right now who, for instance, could look at the Trinidad and Tobago elections and say, you see what was said there? That is a lie. You see this hope here? I've seen one or two things pointing in that direction, but we need to develop institutions that can do that for our people, because our people are too easily seduced by rum and roti politics and by the silver tongue whenever it is uttered.
Yeah. Absolutely. Bishop Harvey, thank you so much for appearing on the Bubb Report this week. Viewers and listeners, we just concluded a conversation with the Bishop of St. George's in Grenada, in the Diocese of St. George's in Grenada, Bishop Clyde Martin Harvey, and we reflected on the life and legacy of the departed Pope Francis, who was buried in the Vatican yesterday. Of course, as when this program will be aired, this program has been aired today, Sunday, after several days of mourning. The next step now is that the Roman Catholic Church and the faithful will continue that period of mourning until the conclave begins, the conclave that will elect a new pope. And of course, we'll be watching what that outcome will be. Of course, there is a way, how it works is that there is the white smoke, black smoke, meaning that no pope was elected, white smoke meaning that a pope is elected. That newly elected pope from the College of Cardinals is then announced to the Vatican with Habemus Papam, and that's when we will know who the new pontiff of the Roman Catholic Church will be. Viewers and listeners, this is the Bubb Report. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Please stand by.
Should your loved ones pass on, they deserve to be treated with dignity. And at S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, we can provide you with that service. We can take you every step of the way during your sorrowful moments. When that need arises, call S.A. Johnson Funeral Home at 347-777-9797. That's 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home is a Caribbean family-owned funeral home here in Brooklyn, providing funeral services, but in a dignified way. From cremation to burial to the repatriation of your loved ones, you don't have to go through the hassle, as we provide exceptional service that allows you to mourn and heal peacefully. For more information, visit our website, www.sajohnsonfuneral.org. Send us an email at sajfuneral@aol.com or call 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, because you deserve to be treated with dignity.
We seek the truth.
Would you be handing your resignation to the Minister of Culture tomorrow, sir?
No, I will not.
The leader of the opposition, we have accused your government, sir, of using the Grenada Development Bank to facilitate the financing of personal loans for certain government ministers.
The other side is in no position to talk about those issues, and I will leave it there.
We discover new perspectives.
You know his leadership style, and so many are saying, why are you coming now to talk about those issues?
Now is the time to speak. You have the right to decide who will take over.
And you met with Dr. Mitchell, and perhaps you might want to confirm what that meeting was about in your response. But
Dr. Mitchell, like myself, are Grenadians.
We ask the right questions.
Why was there no report on the work done of the commission? And how is this new committee different from the commission that was initially established back in 2022? So who are these elements that are using you?
I'm disappointed in my political leader.
And why is that animating those political conversations now?
It's a very interesting question.
The Bubb Reports with Dr. Kellon Bubb. Thought-provoking, truthful, unbiased, and truly original reporting.
And viewers and listeners, we welcome you back to this week's edition of the Bubb Report. We're happy that you can stay with us. Please remember to like and share this week's live stream. Now, the disappearance and subsequent death, let me just take that one. Let me just take two on that one there. All right. The disappearance and subsequent death of 11-year-old Adrianna Younge in the pool of the Doubleday International Hotel and Bar in Tushan of the East Bank, Essequibo area in Guyana is eerily similar to an incident which occurred at the same premises some 13 years ago. Now, Young's body was discovered floating in the hotel's swimming pool about 20 hours after she disappeared. Now, the child's body was discovered around 10 a.m. last Thursday, April 24th, 2025, by family members and enraged protesters who stormed the hotel premises following repeated requests for the police to follow up on inquiries they made earlier concerning the fact that she went missing. Now, Young's body bore visible signs of violence, including injuries to her hands, knees, and face. There was also what appeared to be cotton wool stuffed in her nose, raising immediate suspicions of foul play. Of course, the discovery was made hours after police released information stating that surveillance footage caught the child leaving the hotel premises in a car. Now, Adrianna's death triggered memories of a similar incident which occurred at the same hotel on the 21st of November in 2012. Now, Sadiq Juman, 20, was found dead in a swimming pool at the popular Doubleday Hotel days before his birthday. His body was discovered in the pool by hotel workers around 4 p.m. that afternoon, about 24 hours after he was seen entering the premises. Now, investigations revealed that Juman was beaten into a state of unconsciousness and dumped into the hotel pool. Now, in the case of young Adrianna, the 11-year-old was at the Doubleday Hotel pool with her grandmother and other relatives for a family outing. She was discovered missing between 3 and 4 p.m. that day. Her grandmother reported that the child was given money to purchase a swim band to enter the swimming pool. A short while after, the family realized she went missing and began searching the premises for her, but was nowhere to be seen. The worried family then notified the police authorities in the Tushan region, and of course, the police arrived at about 3:30 in the afternoon. Now, here to make sense of this harrowing case is retired Assistant Commissioner of Police Paul Slow, who also served as the chairman of the Guyana Police Force. Mr. Slow, welcome to this week's edition of the Bubb Report, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I want to get your initial reaction, sir, to this case when it sort of, went viral and made the news all over, not only in Guyana, but of course in the Caribbean as well. Your initial reaction as someone who served in law enforcement.
Well, first I have to say that you did an excellent introduction to give a very accurate background as to what took place. As you indicated, this child, 11 years old, Adrianna Younge, went there to this Doubleday Hotel on Wednesday. They said about 1 o'clock in the afternoon with her grandmother to swim.
Yes.
The grandmother gave her money to buy a swim band, and then it is reported that sometime about 2 hours after, when the grandmother decided to call this young girl and her siblings, perhaps to end the outing, she was discovered missing. An alarm was raised, the place was searched, she was not found. A report was made to the police, and the police, it is alleged, went there and searched, and they too did not find this girl. They said that they did search the pool. Now, the father and other relatives of this girl were convinced that she was there, so they more or less camped out outside of the hotel and refused to move. Now, what is causing the problem, in my view, is the fact that the police turned up there at some time. It is claimed that the police carried out a search, did not find the girl on the premises. And as you indicated, well, they claim too that the police remained at the hotel for some period of time and made every effort to get the child's father and those other persons who were there to remove during the course of the night. But they were adamant that they will remain because the child they felt was in the premises. And what made matters even worse, the police then, as you indicated, issued a release to say that this girl was seen entering a car. They gave the description of the car, they gave the license number of the car, and was headed in an eastern direction towards a village called Vreden Oop. They said further, and that was what they said was shown by the cameras of the command center of that police division. They then, according to the report, contacted the Georgetown command center, and they said that those cameras showed that this car was parked in a village somewhere, some distance away. That is what the police report said. Again, the parents were convinced that that was not so. And what apparently led to even more suspicion is that on the night of the incident, that's Wednesday the 23rd, when they asked to check the CCTV cameras, they were told by the manager of the hotel that the cameras were not in working order. That is what it's been reported.
So let's take a pin there. If the cameras were not in working order, how then do you have surveillance footage of her being taken from the same hotel where the cameras are not allegedly not in working order?
Well, they're suggesting that those footage came from the divisional command center, not the cameras.
Not at the hotel.
Right, from the division command center. That's what they're claiming. So, to make matters worse, the people are claiming that the police made concerted efforts to get them to remove from in front of the premises. When they were not removing, it is alleged that the police told them that the girl was sighted at some village nearby in a bus shed. They called the bus number and all of that. All of that was clearly intended to get the people to move away from the entrance of the hotel. One can reasonably speculate that the reason why they wanted to do that is because they were in collusion with the perpetrators and wanted clearance so that the body could have been removed. Now, what makes matters even more interesting is that the car that they described, because they said when they contacted the registered owner of this motor vehicle, the registered owner claimed that he rented the vehicle about a week before to someone by the name of Orlando. The police said that they tried to contact Orlando without any success. The gentleman who was in possession of this car claims that 6 o'clock on Thursday morning, there's the morning following the disappearance of this girl, he was going towards the Demara Harbor Bridge, and the police there intercepted him and told him that he was wanted in connection with what they call a hit-and-run accident. In other words, they're claiming at the same place, this car struck down a girl and drove away. The fellow claimed he was never, ever in the area. Shortly after, other police said, well, it's not a hit-and-run accident. They wanted to question him in relation to abduction. He was taken to a nearby station and kept there all day, from 6 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And people things went out awry once the body was found, because searches were done. There's a gentleman who goes by the name of Guyanese Critic, who is a supporter of the government. Wednesday night, he went there with his camera. He has a podcast and all that. He went into this hotel premises with his camera and did video recording of the pool and surrounding areas. And this girl was not there. And the morning, about 10 o'clock on Thursday morning, this girl mysteriously turned up in the pool.
So this is the question I have, Mr. Slow here, and that has to do with, did the Guyana police authorities ever at some point decide to cordon off the hotel, prevent people from going in there while they were conducting their searches, while they were conducting the investigations? What is your reporting telling you about that aspect of it?
Well, all the indications are they never did that. They never cordoned the hotel. They never sought to prevent people from leaving. They never sought to allow prevent persons from entering. It was never treated as a crime scene, which should be standard operational procedure. The place should have been cordoned. No one, and I mean no one, and I made a social media post about it, no one should have been allowed to leave that premises. You have to go through normal, basic investigative procedure. Get the names of all the guests, get the names of all the staff members, all the persons who were there. They never did that. And as I said, to make matters worse, they came up with this, what I refer to as a subterfuge to get people away, the protesters. Well, they weren't actually protesting at that time. They were just there camping out because they were certain that that young lady had not left the premises. And they did everything to remove. The question is why? And people are saying that the reason why they wanted to do that is because they knew that the body was there, and they wanted to ensure that no one was there to see when they brought the body out.
So, as someone who served in law enforcement and who served in the highest capacity of law enforcement in Guyana, what protocol would you, if you were in that position, what protocol would you have followed if you were in that position following the report that this young lady went missing?
Well, it's a clearly established protocol. There's a missing person, and then from the time the report is made, the records would have been made at the station, and there would have been a response. And let me be fair to them. Maybe the initial response would not have been with full force and all of that sort, but you would have gone to this place and you would have made inquiries. And from the time you realized that this girl was not seen, when you got there, the next protocol is to make sure that, as we say, you lock down the entire place. You call for reinforcement, and you make sure that that place is kept secured. As I've said, that is by the initial responders. And then the people who are going to do the investigations will come. They will then go through the records as they want to know all the people who are there, question people who are by the pool, question the grandmother, get a statement from the grandmother, and all those who are there, you have to have it. That was not done. That was not done. And that is part of the feeling that led to the feeling that they were complicit in this entire matter.
Now, when you say they, are you referencing the owners of the hotel, or are you referencing how law enforcement handle this?
Law enforcement, I think the feeling is that the owners of the hotel, inclusion with the law enforcement officers, including the assistant commissioner who was there on the scene, Assistant Commissioner Mandal is the regional divisional commander. He was there himself, and one would have expected that such a senior person being there, at least the correct protocol would have been followed. That was not done.
Now, do you get the sense that the young lady never left that facility, that she was always there?
Well, the evidence suggests that, because, as I've said, they said that they saw her leaving this facility. It has been reported that a neighbor, they were able to view the CCTV camera from a neighbor, and that camera showed them, the young lady and her grandmother and others, entering the hotel, and they never left the hotel. And the mystery is, if you are claiming that she left the hotel in this car, this red and black Toyota Ram auto vehicle, they were that specific. How did the body turn up on Thursday morning at the very hotel? So it is clear that from the evidence that the child never ever left the hotel. And as I've said, the reason why the police said that is because they must have been in collusion with the proprietor and or others to make sure that this thing was covered up.
Yes, and I understand, based on recent reporting today, I'm not too sure if it's because of public pressure or obviously if eventually they were able to do what they were required to do in the first place in respect of taking statements, that some people in the hotel, I believe, are being currently held for questioning. There's also reporting that one person fled the jurisdiction of Guyana. There's also reporting that the family is declining to have a local autopsy done. They prefer that an independent, well, not local, but I'm saying the state autopsy, they prefer that an independent autopsy is done in this situation. Now, what other red flags are you observing here? Now, one of the things that I think raised a lot of concern for people was the idea that here you have this active crime scene, which was not again cordoned off or locked down in any way, but then the people took it upon themselves to go into the facility, and eventually it's because of what they did that they found this young woman's body at the pool. Do you think that also sort of taints this particular crime scene? I mean, the building is now destroyed by fire. So what happens there now in terms of evidence collection and things like that? If you have to build a case against whoever it is that might be a suspect in this matter.
Well, you're perfectly correct. The fact that all of these activities, that place was never secured, the whole crime scene is tainted. And even when, or even after the body was discovered, no efforts were made to secure that place, no effort. It is being reported to that it was the police again, who spirited the body away from putting in a police vehicle and spirited it away. Now again, the protocol would have dictated that you would have called in the pathologist or some medical person right there and then at the scene for them to do some preliminary work and examination. But nothing was done. Nothing was done. And it calls again into question why the police did not make sure that that scene was, from the very night when this girl was reported missing, the action of the police was poor, and therefore, again, as I've said, it is believed that it was deliberate. That action was no accident. It was deliberate because they were in collusion with the proprietor and or others to make sure that this thing was, this murder, as it turned out, was, there's no question, because given the fact that at the time when the girl went missing, the place was searched, including the pool. Other places, other parts of the building, it is said, was searched as well. The night, Mikhail Rodriguez, Guyanese cricket, went in there. The video is there for us to see. He video recorded, and he gave commentary at the time of the video recording to say that it is clear that no one is in the pool. The morning, the father is reporting all in the morning, Thursday morning, that is, they went again and checked. Several persons would have checked from the time the young lady went missing, and no one saw this body. Then mysteriously, this body is found about 10 o'clock on Thursday morning, floating, and therefore that must raise a lot of suspicion. And you said earlier, post-mortem examination, I guess, will determine the cause of death. Now, the post-mortem was to be done yesterday, Friday morning. The family objected to it being done because the government said that in order to, they wanted to be transparent, so they're going to bring someone from Barbados, they're going to bring someone from outside. Then they said that a pathologist from Barbados, by the name of, his surname is Paul, will come. I think he's an Indian national. He will come to do the post-mortem. Now the lawyers and the family members objected to that. And they said that they are going to try to secure an independent pathologist. The latest on that is that they have gotten the service of someone from the US who is scheduled to go there, according to the report, sometime tomorrow, and to have the postmortem done sometime on Monday. But that will be interesting because, again, because of my training, I know, and most people who understand a little bit of science and all that will know, that when a person drowns, as against a person who is killed and thrown into water, it is easy for any autopsy to determine whether the person died as a result of drowning or whether the person died and was then thrown into the water. So that would be the first thing, and perhaps one of the most interesting things to come from the postmortem. And as I indicated as well, I hope they can establish a time of death. Because again, it is sad that nothing happened on Thursday when this girl was found at the scene, because a competent medical examiner might have been able to give you a rough idea as to how long, first of all, the body was in the water, because the people are claiming, that's the proprietor, and some people are claiming that this child might have been there in the water since about 2 o'clock the previous day, even though people looked and did not see. Now, a proper examination might have been able to rule out that immediately. So, look, this body could not have been submerged for all these hours in the water, given the discoloration of the skin, whatever it is. So people are looking forward now for the postmortem examination, scheduled, I understand, for Monday morning. People have lost confidence, not only because of this incident. There have been other incidents and people have come out openly and said they have no confidence in the Guyana Police Force, which is sad. That's an organization I saw for 37 years. And to see the things that are being said now, especially against senior people, is very, very, very worrying. People have no confidence that they will do a proper independent investigation. Just 2 weeks ago, 2 persons were killed in Linden. Police shot and killed 2 persons in Linden. They brought in people that said from the regional security system to assist with the investigation again, because there is no confidence that the Guyana Police Force or members of the Guyana Police Force can conduct a proper and independent investigation, which is very, very alarming.
If you were in the seat of because of course you served, and I suspect that the work of the Police Service Commission in Guyana, I suspect that a lot of that work has to do with internal affairs, internal service investigation, and things like that. Yes. What would you be doing now, especially for the first responder officers who initially responded to this, or perhaps a lack of response, really, if you think about it, and just the way in which this was botched from the get-go? What should happen to the officers involved in this? Or do you see this as a more systemic issue within the police service of Guyana?
First of all, let me respond to the last part to say it is systemic. It is systemic. Now, the Police Service Commission of Guyana has a mandate, a constitutional mandate, to promote and discipline ranks from persons in the force from the rank of inspector all the way to assistant commissioner. So other issues are not really within the remit of the Police Service Commission, like transfers and all of those things. But had I been the chairman of the Police Service Commission, I would have demanded a report from the commissioner, especially as it relates to the officers and the inspectors who are involved, and to see whether, but most definitely, given what has gone on, they would have been placed immediately on administrative leave so that a proper investigation can be done. You can have people who are accused of blotching, and perhaps even more than blotching this thing, continue to serve. I noted yesterday, following all the uproar and the problems they have, people were calling on the divisional commander to be sent home. You know what they did? They removed him from that division and they sent him to another division that he had just come from. They moved him from Region 3 and they sent him to Region 4B, which he had only a few months ago come from. So they did a switch. This morning, I think it is, they are now reporting that he has been sent on administrative leave, all because of public pressure and outcry. And people are calling for the commissioner too, who has passed his retirement age, to go, because all of these things point to poor leadership at the level of the force, at the level of the division. So we wait to see what will happen with that. But I would think that an investigation would not only be done to determine the who murdered that child and all that, but an investigation also should encompass the reaction, the action by the police, and who are the ones who are responsible to act or not act in this case.
What does that do for police and community trust? You know, law enforcement always espouses notions of community policing. You know, if you see something, say something. What does that do for police trust, especially against the backdrop of what you've just listed here as occurring, police-involved shootings and things like that in Guyana?
Well, it continues to deteriorate whatever little trust was there. And there was very little. There was very little. If you look on YouTube and other social media, almost weekly, you see police involved with fist fight with members, police in uniform, involved in fist fight with members of the public, members of the public beating up policemen and the policemen in uniform. So no respect is there. And I continue to say that respect is something that you have to earn. And apparently they don't realize that. They believe that because you have on the uniform, then you're going to get automatic respect. People might fear you because they know you have the authority to take away the liberty and the freedom, even temporarily. But the respect is not there. You have cases, and you know, it is sad that the authorities are here, I mean the government, they have not acted to address some of these issues. You had recently, in October of last year, the Assistant Commissioner in charge of administration, Calvin Brutus, who is de facto the second most senior person in the force, 262 criminal charges for money laundering and theft, and 262 misconduct in public office. Those matters are still before the court, so I don't think I can comment much on it. But it shows policemen in recent times charged with drugs, trafficking in narcotics. Only last week, this same week, 3 policemen charged and remanded for stealing drugs from the police station. 3 policemen charged, remanded. Sometime not so long ago, we had the largest cocaine find in Region 1. The police in the region were not involved in that operation. Partly the U.S. Drug Enforcement Authority did the surveillance. They involved the Custom Anti-Narcotic Unit of Guyana and the Guyana Defense Force. Not a single police, including the commissioner, was involved. And it tells a story. It tells a story that the people do not trust the police. We have, again, about 2 weeks ago, the drugs, large quantity of drugs, miraculously turned to flower in what was supposed to be the safest place in police headquarters. This is drugs swung. They stored it there, and I'm talking about thousands of kilograms, large quantity. There was to be an handover between the person who was heading that department, because he was proceeding on leave, and he was handed over to someone else. And they decided, well, we're going to do an audit, we're going to check. The cocaine is now flower, they say. So all of these things are there in the public domain, and it erodes whatever little trust people have in the police. Because frequently we are seeing over the past 4 years in particular, policemen charged, policemen involved in all type of criminal activities. The second most senior man in the force facing 262 criminal charges. It speaks volume. And let me say this, I don't want to be political, but the average person will tell you that part of the problem is political control of the police force. That there's no doubt. I have all the evidence on that, which I've been speaking on frequently on the program that I host, Speaking Out, Exposing Corruption and Incompetence. Political control has led to what we have now. And in the Guyana situation, because of the polarization, many people complain too about the ethnic arrangement where people of a particular ethnic group are given preference even though they might not be qualified. So all of these things have led to an erosion of confidence, a breakdown, almost a total breakdown in the system of law enforcement in Guyana.
And now the other issue that was, and this is unrelated to this case, but that has to do with a State Department report. To the extent that you can trust the State Department reports these days, given how they're cutting everything. But I suspect those are career civil servants who might have released this and not the Rubio regime, the Trump regime. But the report stated that money laundering in Guyana has grown into a systemic issue involving both public officials and private citizens, and is often linked to corruption and organized crime. It goes on to say that Guyana's vulnerabilities stem from the relatively small financial sector and limited regulatory resources that make it challenging to enforce stringent anti-money laundering measures effectively. Guyana's most recent anti-money laundering combating the financing terrorism national risk assessment was finalized in July 2021. Of course, that's before this regime came into office in Washington. And Guyanese officials rated Guyana's money laundering risk as medium high. Now, let's talk about that. Of course, you also served in the leadership role as Commissioner of Police. Why has that been a weak link, shall we say, in enforcement in Guyana, that issue of enforcement of money laundering? Well, and can you see that as a through line to what we're seeing in respect of the proliferation of narcotics and illegal drugs?
Well, yeah, that report also said that when it comes to money laundering, the Guyana police force is a weak link. It stated that in some respect, the Guyana police force is a weak link in the fight against money laundering, and then talk about gold smuggling and all this. But the members of the force are grossly underpaid. The average constable gets like about $600 a month, something in that vicinity. And given the cost of living and all of that, and if you have a community or a society where, and given the geography, Guyana is close to Venezuela, and the suspicion is that drug flows from Colombia to Venezuela into Guyana. And with that type of arrangement, the type of money, drug money, and gun running circulating, and you have poorly or underpaid police ranks, the temptation is going to be there. There's a culture, and I say this without any fear of contradiction. There's a culture in the force where people, traffic men in particular, shake down people on the road. They shake down people they want to raise, they want to, if you commit an offense, you have got to settle with them before, and all of that. All these things move to show that if you have the type of money circulating in Guyana now, drugs, legal or illegal money, and you have people in the force who are underpaid, people are going to be tempted. People are going to be tempted, and that is it. Because, again, many times maybe they are not asked to do anything outwardly illegal. They might be told, well, look, make sure you don't patrol this area at this particular time. Because with the drug that was found in Region 1, it has been alleged that the senior people there were involved, and all they had to do is to make sure that when they hear these airplanes coming in, some fancy hours in the night or so, just make sure you don't respond to it. That's all you got to do, and you're going to be taken care of. So all of these things are very, very worrying. Very worrying. And of course, as I've said, policemen involved. And once policemen are involved in that, the public, and we are seeing that in Guyana, will have no confidence in the force. And as you alluded to earlier, the police, any respectable police force, will depend on the members of the public to assist in crime solving by giving you information, by telling you what they see, and all of that. If members of the public don't trust the police and are not going to tell you anything, you have a problem in law enforcement. And the next issue related to that is confidentiality. People will complain bitterly that they're not going to tell the police anything because from the time you tell the police, the perpetrators will hear that you're the one who snitch on them, so to speak. And therefore, people will see things and they decide to remain silent. We have a serious, serious problem in law enforcement in Guyana. Unfortunately, the government do not want to recognize that. And what they're doing in many cases, they're putting band-aids over festering sores. And we know what the result there will be.
Mr. Slow, any final comments from you, sir, as we end today's program? Of course, in Grenada, we had a similar case many years ago. Young Ariel Bola, her body, her young innocent body was found under very similar circumstances. I don't think in the way that the police handled it, I believe it was totally different. But the fact is, violence was inflicted on a minor in such a gruesome way, and we do have that very ugly legacy, and we see it in many parts of the Caribbean as well. I alluded to an incident, that occurred at the same hotel, incidentally.
Yes.
So let us talk about just this. I don't know, this culture of violence against our youngest and our most vulnerable.
Yeah, it's very worrying. And, people came out and they protest because let me tell you this. When I saw what took place there on Thursday, as a father, as a grandfather, it brought tears to my eyes. A young, innocent 11-year-old. And I maintain that had the police taken the appropriate action initially, the child might not have died. Again, I say we don't know what exact time she died, but if she went there at 1 o'clock and the grandmother within 2 or 3 hours discovered her missing. She might have been somewhere there, and a proper response by the police might have saved the life of the child. So I am fully supporting all the calls from the people who are out protesting up to this morning. People who are out protesting for the removal. This should serve as a catalyst to remove several of the senior officers, not only the one who was sent on administrative leave this morning, that the regional divisional commander at the time, but the commissioner and all of these people cannot remove themselves from responsibility. The Home Affairs Minister has been silent. I know one of the worrying thing about all of this, the shooting at Linden, you have this child found dead, not a single word from the Commissioner of Police, not a single word from the Minister of Home Affairs, nothing. They have been silent. And that is indeed aggravating. You can have incidents of this nature, and you have a man who's the Commissioner of Police not interact with the media to tell them what has happened. They are given releases. Then they gave one yesterday, and they gave one again this morning, media releases. Media releases can't cut it.
And some of those media releases that they gave were also contradictory.
Even to the one that they gave this morning, even to the one they gave this morning, I pointed out some contradictions in it. So it's sad. And I would say that if the government is serious about reforming the police force and restoring some type of confidence, this incident or these 2 recent incidents should serve as a catalyst to start the process to reform the police, which is, and the force badly needs reforming.
All right, Mr. Slow, thank you so much for appearing on this week's edition of the Bubb Report, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. Viewers and listeners, that was Mr. Paul Slow. He served as an Assistant Commissioner of Police in the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. And he also served as part of the Police Service Commission down there. And of course, he was updating us on this very tragic, very tragic demise of Adrianna Younge who was found, her body found floating in a pool almost 24 hours after she was reported missing. And of course, folks are critiquing the way that law enforcement in Guyana treated with this issue, as well as ways in which the hotel staff at that facility dealt with the fact that she went missing. Of course, we'll be following that story. There are other voices from Guyana that we intend to ventilate on the Bubb Report. So we thank you, viewers and listeners, for watching this segment. And folks, this has been yet another edition of the Bubb Report. I'm your humble host, Dr. Kellen Bubb. We thank you for watching this week's program. Of course, next week we'll be back for a full-throated live stream episode of the Bubb Report. And I will see you next week. Until then, I'm your humble host, Dr. Kellen Bubb. We thank you for watching this week's edition of the Bubb Report. Take care. Bye-bye. Hi, everyone. Thanks for checking out the Bubb Report's social media pages. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch our weekly live show, follow our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can catch repeat episodes on Wednesdays at 4 and 5 p.m. respectively on CRFM Radio and GBN TV in Grenada. We are also viewed on Sundays at 8 p.m. on WPG 10 throughout the Caribbean. Thanks for watching.